Sactown Sports app. Switch over when it gets close to 1, so you don't have to deal with that delay. All right? All right, Chris. It is time to have the Brandon Ingram conversation once again. This one fully loaded in a different way. This is from Jake Fisher.
Yes. Go ahead.
Potential landing spots for Brandon Ingram: Sacramento, Atlanta, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily in order, but Sacramento is the first city that he lists. One team to monitor for Ingram would be Sacramento. The Kings have been weighing paths to acquire various wings, sources said, from Kyle Kuzma. That's a typo. Kyle Kuzma, Zach LaVine, and Ingram could be another option for Sacramento to explore. Source said that is a Ron Burgundy situation right there.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. What was that? You said two. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like Ingram, like I kind of said earlier. I mean, if the value of Kuz is going to be maybe higher than what we think, and Brendan, I think, said yesterday that he doesn't necessarily think that, just because Denny went for that necessarily means that Kuzma is going to go for more. Maybe they view Denny as more valuable than Kyle Kuzma, especially with the contract that Denny's on. But yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense. It kind of felt like the Brandon Ingram front was pretty quiet for a minute. Yeah, and I think he's obviously, if you're talking about him, Kuzma, and Zach LaVine, he's the best player of all of those guys. He's the most talented 100%, especially on the offensive end. I think on the defensive end, you kind of have a lot of questions. I think there's more theoretical potential for Kuzma. I think as a defender, we've seen him be a defender before, obviously in those bubble days with the Lakers. Ingram, that's never been a part of his bag. He's always just kind of been a shot creator, a shot maker, and can also really, I feel like his ball handling is pretty underrated as well. He can be kind of your backup playmaking option. I think you can run pick and rolls with him and Sabonis, and I think it would go really well. I do have some concerns, and I put it on socials. I didn't quite word it how I wanted it to come out, but essentially I just kind of think that I have some concerns about his fit in the Kings system. He is somebody who I think, he really shined when Zion was out, which I think is a very, very useful tool the Kings need. If De'Aaron or Domas were to ever miss time, they would definitely need somebody to kind of be that star that steps up, and Brandon Ingram is more than qualified to do it. But it's the we call it the equal opportunity offense, right? I think that's the thing that has me a little bit concerned, is, in this free-flowing spread offense, is Ingram going to get the touches that he needs and the touches that he wants in order to kind of be the Brandon Ingram that we need him to be? And then on the second side of that as well, the whole reason the Pelicans are trading him is because they don't want to have to pay him that next contract. And that next contract is probably going to be a Zach LaVine contract where he's making $50 million per year. Right. That's the part that really starts to scare me, especially when you tie it into what I just kind of mentioned. If he is going to be somebody who's a second option, which I think is obviously fine. Second options can, Jaylen Brown's making $64 million or whatever as a second option. So it's not necessarily that's the problem, but with Sabonis and with Keegan needing at some point to get more shots up as well, you're going to be paying Brandon Ingram that $50 million, which will be, at least for some period of time here, the highest paid player on the team. Does that necessarily make sense for this squad to have three guys potentially making over $50 million, and Fox when he gets his extension, BI, and Sabonis? It just has me a little concerned. I'm not sure if I'm full-blown, I'm not doing it. I think BI is a good enough talent to where you figure the rest out later, but it's a bit concerning, a dude that seems to kind of thrive the most when he's the primary option, him as a second, maybe a third option. I just don't know how comfortable he is in that role and how willing he is to accept that.
Well, I'll approach this in kind of two parts. Okay. The first part is going to be the money situation. And I would just think at this point, Chris, just like you said before, it's pay to play these days. Yeah. And if you're looking for someone that can be considered a big three, you're going to have to pay them at some point. Yeah. Yes, it would be perfect because even the Kuzma, whatever the situation is, okay, are you going to win that championship before Kuzma's deal is done? You're going to have to pay these guys.
Yeah.
You're going to have to pay these guys. So I think it's just the cost of admission these days, and it's going to happen. And we know De'Aaron would then supersede him, and we go from there. I really want to take this to the I guess the question of fit, because I don't know. I know there are a lot of versions of the Kings offense. You have out there Tyrese Halliburton in Indiana with the Pacers. They play up tempo, things like that. But they have a Siakam doesn't need the ball, but he'll ISO as well. And it begs me to ask the question, well, I understand the offense that the Kings run, but then I would ask you how many teams, or who are the teams that run the type of offense that the Kings run that have been to the promised land? I guess I would say, if you're adding a talent like Brandon Ingram and you're going to have to pay him, should you have questions, as I've had and we've had throughout the season? Maybe there needs to be some augmenting and tweaking to the offense just on its face.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's something we've kicked around a couple times. As you're going to get more talented players who are a little bit more accustomed to having higher usage percentage, the Sabonis having the ball and then you making a decision in 0.5 seconds doesn't really fit everyone's play style. And, it's a question of, do you want to bring in players who fit your play style, or do you want to at some point bring in talent and again, start to adjust from there? I think, as it currently stands, I would guess if BI is going to come in, they're going to have to at least relinquish it a little bit. Maybe that's still one of their core principles, but they will have to run more pick and roll, because you do need to take advantage of Brandon Ingram having the ball in his hands and isolating Sabonis and BI to run their own pick and roll on their own isolated side and take advantage of that and maybe, weaponize that a little bit. I think the Kings definitely would get into these lulls and these rhythms really of just kind of going through the motions with their offense. And when shots aren't falling, the offense would get stagnant and people would just be chucking them up sometimes. And it definitely needs some adjusting for sure. I just don't know if there's any signs that that's going to happen. I mean, we think it can, and, it would make sense for it, but Jordy was the defensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator and Jay Triano is still here.
Yeah.
Not saying Jay is, this has been the system Jay Triano runs his whole life and he doesn't know anything else. I'm sure he can throw some adjustments into it, but just in terms of, personnel, there hasn't really been changes that would suggest that's the direction they would go. Not saying they wouldn't, but there's just nothing right now showing that would be the case.
Right. And we had this conversation with the Mike D'Antoni offenses as well. Totally. But to be fair, Mike D'Antoni, he had more to go off of.
Yeah.
Could I get to the promised land? I'm so close. We're getting to the conference finals. We're doing things like that. When you look at what the Kings are doing right now, and you see, okay, well, we, with this current regime, De'Aaron going into his 8th season now, not 8th season with this regime, but okay, we were the 3 seed, and then yes, injury, and then we didn't even make the playoffs. I don't think that's enough to say, well, we're not going to take, because that's the thing. If you look at the 3 names that we keep kicking around, we've asked the same question with all 3. I think we've landed on Kuzma being the easiest to probably figure it out. But when it comes to Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram, to a lesser degree, Kyle Kuzma, all 3 of those guys, they'd have to learn to kind of fit that system. And I would just say, somebody said it on the Sac chat as well. I mean, the Warriors had a bit of a system. Yes, they got Kevin Durant, but I saw those issues when I was in the Bay Area. We all did in 2016 when it wasn't as free-flowing towards the end of the game, and it's time to get it bucket. The Kings don't have enough bucket getters. So if you're asking me, hey, do the Kings need to dial this back to, accommodate bucket getters, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would do it in a heartbeat. So you got to figure it out. Life is about changes. Life is about being able to be flexible. And if you're not able to be flexible, then the game is going to pass you by, because these names are all these names that we keep. Okay, fine. Mikal Bridges is probably a name that would be easier to fit the system. And we just saw what he went for. So, and I don't even know if Mikal Bridges makes you as good as the team with Kyle Kuzma. I have no clue. All I know is that I can't sit here and say we can't do something, or the question marks that I have get fully bypassed by the fact that I want another bucket getter for the Kings.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think of a closing lineup of Fox, Monk, Brandon Ingram, Keegan, and Sabonis, and I'm licking my chops. Like you talk about, in the final minutes, having as many shot creators as possible. Those are three guys who I'm very comfortable having the ball in their hand, in Fox, Monk, and Ingram. And then you just put Keegan out on the corner. You have Malik out there, possibly, if he's not one of the people on ball beyond the perimeter as well. That's really scary. You got Sabonis clearing the lane, setting screens, and keeping them open in the pick and roll. I think that's a fantastic lineup. And I would definitely hope that, they can get hey, maybe we run this offense for 42 minutes, but the last 5, or I guess it would be 43 minutes, the last 5, we have to, just because, and it ends up naturally happening because things get tight and coaches stop being a factor, players start to take over. But I would guess in general, they should probably, even outside of those last 5 minutes, they should run more ISO if they are going to bring specifically Brandon Ingram. I think Brandon Ingram would be wonderful in a pick and roll situation with Domantas Sabonis, or even I would love to see it doesn't have to just be Sabonis setting screens. If we can get some guard screens going, if we can get Keegan Murray involved in some pick and pop, I think this offense can go to crazy different levels. They just have to be willing to experiment with some things and maybe go through some lumps first.
If you look at the personnel that is probably going to be moving and grooving, right? Kevin Huerter, he really fits the system. He might be out the door. Harrison Barnes, he really fits the system. He might be out the door. Now you're coming in with different guys like Keon Ellis. Davion Mitchell's already gone. You got Keon Ellis. You got Devin Carter, guys that are going to be different within this offense. So when the personnel changes, it gives you more flexibility, and not flexibility. You have to. You have to, because your personnel has changed. Coming up next, do not go anywhere. We've cooked up the Bobby Portis trade. You wanted it. We did it. Is it good enough? We'll see. Stiles and Watkins, Sactown Sports.
Subscribe